We had a great session this morning, and we will make the recordings and the slide decks available. So you will get those by email in a day or two. It'll take us a little time to compile and upload, but those will be sent to everyone that registered. All right, and there's Joni. Okay, so Joan, I'll let you go ahead and kick things off again.
All right, thank you. Our first speaker this afternoon is Kelly McFarland Stratman. She's the Chief of Staff for the LWV US. She will share with us ideas on how to locate and nurture future leaders. Kelly has spent much of her 15 years in the Leeds National Office, working in both membership and field support areas. And she's been working with the organization's 750 affiliates on organizational development issues. She has managed several initiatives at the state and national level, including membership and leadership development, Citizen Initiative for Transparency and Local Voices, and Citizen Conversations on Civil Liberties. Kelly is a member of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area. So Kelly, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Joan, and hello to everyone. I am going to share my screen, or I think perhaps I already am. So let me see if I can get us back to the beginning. There we go. So thank you all very much for having me here this afternoon. I do want to take care of a few housekeeping items here. Although I think after this morning's session, and given the fact that we seem to be living our lives in Zoom these days with different meetings for League and otherwise, I think everyone's probably an expert in this space, but do want to encourage you, if you're not speaking, to mute yourself. And do encourage you to use that chat feature throughout. If you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time. I have tried to set aside some time for questions at the end. I was going to take the opportunity to introduce myself, but Joan has done a nice job of that already. I know you all have had an opportunity to visit with each other a little bit throughout the day already, but I would love to hear more about who is here. So would certainly encourage you to use that chat feature to drop your name and where you're zooming in from today in there, so I can get to know all of you a little bit better. As Joan so kindly mentioned, I have been with the League for a number of years. So I'm a member of the Fairfax Area League, first and foremost. I live in Vienna with my husband and my two teenage daughters, who are getting involved in democracy work as well, which is very exciting to see. And I have been with the League for over 2 decades now. I started with the State League in Ohio, and have been at the national office for coming up on almost 18 years. So in that time, as Joan mentioned, I've worn a variety of hats, and just am excited to be with you all today. And let me see if I can pull the chat up here and see. Some of you are putting some information in there. I know when I was scrolling through before we started, I saw some familiar names, and I saw that lots of new names as well. So welcome to all of you. And again, thank you for being here today. So let me tell you quickly about our session. And for anyone who has worked with me, you'll know I am a huge fan of this little tool. I call it the POP, the purpose, the outcome, and the process. And I find it a really useful way to kind of focus conversations and meetings. And so here's why we're having the session, the purpose. I know the title was Leadership Development. That's a very broad one. What I wanted to focus on today was to explore sort of some of those qualities that make a high-performing leader. And my hope is that by the end of our session today, that everyone will come away with at least one tool to use as you move forward in your organizational work, whatever leadership role you happen to be playing in the organization. The process is our agenda, how we're going to try to do that in the time that we have together. Before we move on and jump into the session, though, I do want to acknowledge a couple of things, important things. First and foremost, there are some amazing leaders on the call today as part of our Zoom session. And I know this because I've had the great honor and pleasure to work with many of you over the years. And I also know this because of the incredible work that has been happening all around the state this year, this election season, before then, and I know what's in the works to come later this year. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we are at different places, sort of in our leadership journey, if you will. Some of us might consider ourselves real veterans, you know, strong, longtime leaders. Others might consider ourselves maybe closer to that starting block or the starting line in the process. And so again, I hope that by having this session together, we can learn from each other, and also that we can share some common tools that will allow us to work together perhaps more easily as we go forward. And dare I say, maybe even learn something new that you can put into practice as we go forward. So with that, what I want to do is make sure that we're all on the same page. We love words in League, I know, and I thought it would be important for us to just do a quick brainstorm together. What action words would you use to describe a high-performing leader? And I'm hoping that you can put some of these into the chat, and I'm also hoping that I'm going to be able to see the chat. Let's see if I can pull it up here. And actually, there we go. So if I can ask you to go ahead and drop some of those words in there. And Joan, I'm going to acknowledge I'm struggling, Joan and Deb, to get the chat to stay up on my, whoops, giving away my answers, to see the chat stay up. Maybe I could ask one of you to read out some of the action words that are coming in.
I'd be happy to, Kelly.
Thanks, Deb.
So, it keeps moving on me too. So a good listener, excellent listener, listening, lead by example, knowledgeable, dynamic, enthusiasm, leaders get visible results and enact change, open to all ideas, efficient, organized, good motivator, enthusiasm, staying in touch with the whole team, often individually, critical thinker, collaboration, conscientious/responsible, willing to do what's hard but right if necessary, frames action to make things possible, responsive, organized, effective, good delegator, positive, optimistic, supportive, high integrity, model the way.
Phew, wow, that is a great list. And I think, as I kind of gave away there a moment ago, I compiled my own list, and I think these are going to fit together nicely. And I hope what I would like to do is to kind of boil it down. There's so many good things there, and I want to try to boil it down into these 4. And I think I heard aspects of these come through. And these are based, there are so many models out there on leadership development, and I know you all are well aware of that. This is loosely based on the Schroeder model, but you know, we could spend, there are whole books, there are whole courses, we could spend the whole day today just talking about leadership models. But the thing is that there are many commonalities, and I think I heard some of these terms come through in the list that you all generated as well. And so I wanted to think about what are some of these common threads that come through all these different leadership models that come through the list that you all brought together there, and provide a framework to then talk about some real specific tools, some ways that we can develop our leadership muscle, if you will, things that we can keep in our toolbox as we move forward as leaders. And I'm going to go through each of these areas and define them a little bit. And then, as I said, share some accompanying tools that we have been using a lot at LWV-US. And I think some of them will sound familiar to you, others maybe not. But again, I hope they are good additions to your toolbox. So the first one, think. What do we mean by this? So this is probably the most intuitive one, right? It's the key starting place. We need to understand what we're trying to achieve, whatever it is, whether it's planning an event, whether it's solving a problem, whether it's doing fundraising. What is it that we are trying to achieve or solve? It's a question I use a lot in the office, certainly, is what is the problem we're trying to solve for? Really getting clarity at the outset of what we're trying to do. The follow-up questions that go along with this are, what do we know? What's already been established? What information is available out there? And I guess the flip side of that, or the converse, is what else do we need to know? And what are our options going forward? And again, I know this sounds probably very intuitive and very simplistic, but it really is important and critical that we're all starting from the same place. And I was reminded of the quote from Albert Einstein, and some of you may have heard this before, but he has a quote that's pretty famous, and it says, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the question and then 5 minutes thinking about the solution." So really being able to generate a solution is only based on if we know what the actual problem is or what we hope to solve. So this is the first tool that I want to introduce to you. And as we define our goal, I want to put this cautionary piece out there. I want you to be aware of, or to think about, what we shorthand as PTR. And the letters are there, they're defined. The P is for preferences, T for traditions, and R, the requirements for success. And I want to encourage you to make sure that you're using the right lens when you are looking at the problem and starting to define it, that you're really boiling it down to what are the requirements for success. You're not getting caught up in those preferences. These are the things that my personal bias is, we would do it this way. My personal preference is we would go in this direction. But what are the requirements for success? And that we might not get caught up in the traditions. And in League, being a 100-year-old organization, sometimes we default to that answer, well, we've always done it that way. But sometimes questioning whether that is the right way to do it. And this is not to say, and I want to be really clear about this, I've got it written in all caps in my notes here. Preferences and traditions are not bad, right? They have a really important role in there. But what I am encouraging you is to stop and think about this from the requirements for success perspective. And I'm going to share just a very quick story with you that I heard recently on a podcast, I think it was, but it was a woman who does a lot of work around meeting planning and so forth. And of course, this is a space where we have had to pivot in so many ways. Look at how we're doing this workshop now today. But she was telling the story of her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law is a high school ceramics teacher. And as so many of us, my teenagers included, we're back to school virtually. And so her thought was, my gosh, do I have a role anymore as a high school ceramics teacher? How on earth, kids don't have, kilns at home and this or that. But she said she took a step back and she really reflected on what was the requirement for success, right? What was the purpose of her being a teacher and being an art teacher, a ceramics teacher in particular. And her thought process was, it was about sparking creativity. It was about pushing kids into new spaces. It was about people imagining things in new and different ways. You look at a block of clay and then it turns into a pot. You have to have imagination, right, to get from A to B. And so she revamped how she thought about it, and obviously wasn't teaching ceramics anymore, but was introducing some of those requirements for success to her students. And I thought that was a really poignant story. Let's look at this in terms of League, right? And some of the work that we might be doing. And I know you did some talking this morning, about the election and so forth. So let's think about voter registration, right? Core staple issue of the League as an organization. You're at your board meeting, you're at a committee meeting, and someone says, we need a leader for the voter registration effort this fall, this spring, whenever it is. Now you could start, as we look here at your preferences. Boy, if I had my druthers, I would prefer that we get all volunteers who've done voter registration in the past. Okay. But if we do that, if we put that out there right away, we've really narrowed our pool down. We've closed so many options or opportunities off to ourselves. We could go with the tradition. Well, we've always had a half-day training session for local, for the volunteers at the local country club. Well, again, this is a place where we might have some challenges. Certainly in this pandemic we are right now, we're not getting together. Is a half day really necessary? What else, what are our requirements for success? And our requirements are that we need to recruit and train new voter registration volunteers who can help out right away. So going back to that requirement and using that lens allows us to step away from any barriers that might be with them. And it helps us really to make sure that we are not putting any implicit bias into this conversation. As we look at what we do and how we do things, it's really fundamental for us to look at those requirements, as I said. And it's not that the preferences and traditions are inherently bad. It's just whether they are really necessary and why they exist. Pulling it back up to the requirements allows us to open up the idea of possibility.
Where's my volume? Okay.
So the next action word that I had up on my little cube, and I think some of you brought this up in the chat as well, is to inspire. And what I was thinking about when I read this and when I did some of the reading around the model was that we are really talking about how do we recruit individuals to assist us? How do we become that magnet that people are attracted to? And because we all know that great leaders do not do it alone. That is for sure. They need a team and they need other leaders going right along with them. And so in this case, I'm asking you to think about how you are encouraging people to join you. What are the motivations that you're using? And how do we set people up to succeed? And so there are some practical things that I'm sure all of you have thought about and have used in the past. One is that important, again, articulating the purpose and the goal, making sure that everybody knows what that goal is and why they're part of this effort together. It's being really intentional in your planning and thinking about the tasks and roles that are necessary and making them as sort of concrete, discrete, or bite-sized as possible if you can. And also though, making sure that people understand how their little piece adds to other little pieces and pulls together the whole goal. And it's important to think about that individual person and their experience. How are they understanding what's going on? How are they being engaged in this work? What fits for them, kind of meeting them where they are at? And obviously talking about the why is important and making sure that you are really building those relationships so that it's not one time that they hopefully come and work at, for example, at a voter registration effort, but that they want to come back and work with you more frequently and more often. And a critical piece of that, of course, is asking and being as engaging as possible in that ask. And to that end, again, I want to throw up another tool that I hope you all will have in your toolbox. And that is using a DEI lens. And the DEI, I think many of you probably know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what we're referring to there. We sometimes shorthand this to call it the equity lens. And this is a tool that really should be applied to all of the work that we're doing, not just in this Inspire stage, but in all aspects of our work. It should sit really at the center of our culture and of the community that we are building as an organization. So I've put here on the screen, what it is, and at the end of this, I have some links to some of these tools for you that exist on the League's national website, and we can certainly make those available to you in the chat and whatnot. But let me just explain a little bit about the lens here. And so I'll just read what's on the screen. It's a way of examining a program, a process, a product, whatever it is we're trying to create, right? With regards to how it's perceived by a variety of communities, voices, and perspectives. And what, if any, barriers may exist that is preventing it from being an equitable and inclusive endeavor or experience for everyone. And so let me share with you what this kind of looks like, this tool. So the DEI lens really is just a series of questions that we ask you to keep in mind as you're starting your work. We have them bucketed into 5 big areas. They're on the left-hand side of your screen right now. But they include things like who is involved in this process, thinking about who is really impacted by the work that we're doing, what are the intended or the unintended outcomes or consequences as we move forward with our work. Does the work that we're proposing, the work that we're doing, align with our vision for being an equitable and inclusive organization? And what changes could be made to make this more equitable? And so again, if we were to take this back to sort of a real life example, so we're back to our voter registration, right? We're looking for volunteers to help us lead this effort. You can imagine how this lens could be applied to those preferences, traditions, and requirements, right? We could think about all the way from the leaders doing the planning, right? Who is involved in that process, to how we are recruiting those one-time volunteers. What is the kind of language or ask that we are making of people and using in doing this recruitment, right? And all of these questions need to be really at the front and center at the start when we are doing our planning, as we are defining those requirements, as we are defining the purpose, making sure that we are applying this lens to the work as we go forward. I think, as we look at this right away, I mentioned the word bias already, as we look at preferences, right? Excluding it to folks who have already volunteered in the past, right? We're really narrowing, we're putting up huge barriers, huge walls there. And the second one, a requirement of a half-day training. Again, is that something that everyone has the time for? Is it really necessary? Is it an absolute requirement to the success of the program? Could it be done differently? Could it be done virtually? Could it be done in smaller segments? And then the fact of even where the training session is being held, at a country club. Is that the most inclusive place? Is it the most centrally located place even in a community or in an area to engage volunteers? And then of course, thinking about the registration and work that we are going to be doing, who are the other community leaders that we might want to engage in this work? Where are voter registration efforts most needed? Where are the places that, or the communities that tend not to have the same kind of voice in the process as others? And I'm sure you all could think of 100 more questions that could come out of that. So again, Einstein's, we're spending 55 minutes on the questions and 5 minutes on the solutions. So let's move ahead to the third action word that I had here, which was involve. And this is really, once we have identified some folks, I'm thinking here about how are we engaging them? Leaders will tell you that information sharing is critical. All leaders know that. But do we ever stop and think about how, the method by which we are sharing information? And by here, I'm not talking about technology. I'm not talking about whether a text is better than an email versus something else. But I'm thinking more about how we frame the information that we're sharing. Because I think sometimes it's important to take that pause and think about it, because it helps us to get to our goals in different ways. These things have different purposes. And again, we probably go about doing a lot of this work without stopping to think these things through. But sometimes it's helpful to take that moment to ensure that you are getting to the place that you want to be. So this is the next tool in the toolbox that I wanted to talk about. And again, I'm going to give you more letters. I feel a little bit like alphabet soup here, but these are the 3 C's. And the first C is for communicate. And communication is really just about sharing information. And I heard this come up a lot in those words that you put in the chat, listening, telling, sharing, right? And this is important. And sometimes this is exactly what is needed. We just need to send an email out that says something. The voter registration signs are ready. Come and pick them up, right? Sometimes we just need that one piece. Sometimes though, we need to go to the next C here, which is coordinate. So this is about individuals working separately, working independently, but aligned, right? In some way, working towards a shared goal. So it often has a communication element to it, but this one is about working out what needs to be consistent and clearly articulating what and could and should happen potentially independently. So this allows for sort of limited ownership, but working together to get that combined power. So for an example on this one, we could think about National Voter Registration Day. So your voter registration team that you have recruited, great, we're all gonna do voter registration at the giant supermarkets in our county during the week of September 24th, right? How each table is going to be set up, maybe it's going to be different. How the volunteers are going to be slotted in, and scheduled out and so forth, independent, but coming together to have that impact. Finally, the last one, and this is the one that helps us to find, frankly, our next crop of leaders, helps us really in this leadership development pipeline, is the collaboration. And it's about working together and making decisions together about what to do. So it requires probably communication and coordination to be part of this. I'll admit, this is the one that is the heaviest lift. It takes the most time, but it is really critical. If you want folks to feel like they are all in, they are really bought in, they are taking responsibility, they are taking ownership of the plan. This is the time when you want someone to say that I'm seeing my ideas, in this larger purpose, and I've been part of making this happen. So this is when you want to take that moment and really collaborate. And this, often starts, we're going right back to the beginning again, right? Of thinking about what are the requirements, what is our purpose, how are we going to work together? And of course, we've applied that DEI lens to make sure that the collaborators at the table are all the folks that we need to have at the table. And this isn't to say that we should be collaborating all the time, right? Again, there is a place and a time for all of these kinds of communications, but I think sometimes we conflate them together, and then we are not able to get to the results that we want to. So let's look at this one more time, the 3 C's. Again, we're gonna apply this to our voter registration example. I always like to get to the practical, and so here it is in a slightly different way. But again, you can see how each one of these leads to a slightly deeper engagement. And you can see the trajectory that is getting us to developing more leaders and getting greater ownership and buy-in. So, something as simple as the voter registration is going to take place at the high school on Friday. That's just a simple communication, right? Bit of information going out. The coordination, so maybe we're going to try to do it at multiple high schools. So it's all going to happen in the next 2 weeks. How each high school is happening, independently owned, but we're coming together. And then the collaboration would be, starting out at the beginning. What would a comprehensive voter registration effort aimed at students in our county look like? What should we be taking on? And hopefully we're getting to some of these other places. Again, all essential in balance. So the last verb that I wanted to tackle here is achieves. And again, I heard some of you talk about this, folks getting it done, right, in the list that you put up in the chat. And again, this assumes that we had clear goals at the beginning, because the only way you can know if you've succeeded is if you knew where you were trying to get to, right? And so this isn't just that a time has ended, but this hopefully is, our goal was to, and we probably should have put this at the beginning, not only recruit and train new volunteers for voter registration this fall, but we wanted to have 20 people involved in this, right? Or we wanted to have voter registration drives go on in 10 sites, or we wanted to move into 3 new areas to do voter registration this fall, or what have you. So if you have this, really recognizing when you have reached that success and celebrating those that have been involved in making that happen. It's also critical, and I know we're usually so exhausted when we get to the finish line, we don't often take this moment to do it, but it is really important to get feedback for the future. So asking a few simple questions about how the experience was for your leaders and for your volunteers, what might they recommend, what might they change, and how we can build for the future. And I think one of the footnotes I want to put on this one is really to try to get as much honest feedback as possible. Failure is okay, right? I think we sometimes shy away. We certainly get nervous that we don't want to fail in anything that we do. But I think, part of the innovation process is trying things, and they don't always work, So I think it's just identifying that and being okay with that. I always like to go to those places as not being failures, but as being learning opportunities, right? So it's an opportunity for us to learn from how we have done things and how we can move forward in the future. And finally, this last place in achievement, I want to make sure that we are thinking about is reflecting on who has been part of this process with you. And they are our new leaders, right? They are maybe not new to leadership in general, but new to our leadership ranks. Maybe this is a place where they could expand and take on new roles. So making sure you're identifying those folks and helping them to move forward. And so this brings me to the last tool that I want to introduce. And I'm confident that this is one that many of you have seen before, but Tuckman is another model that many of us have seen in terms of team building. And you know, he talks about forming, storming, norming, and performing. And these are the phases that all groups or committees or teams that work together go through. You know, we sort of have the honeymoon at the beginning. We have a little bit of conflict as we're learning how to work together. We then kind of get past the conflict and we start moving closer, inching towards our goals in the norming stage. And then finally we are together, right? We become sort of the well-oiled machine and we are moving along swimmingly towards our goals. The piece that I want to add, and this is sort of a relatively new addition to his work, is he adds a last piece, adjourning. And it has different meanings to it, but the piece that I always elevate here is that this is a place where you are looking for who comes next. So part of that adjourning process is getting the feedback, is understanding what worked and what didn't, is taking advantage of those learning opportunities, and it is also thinking about who else, who could succeed me, or what else could succeed this committee. You know, we've got the voter registration piece down. What comes next? We've got these pieces down. How do we expand that? So again, I don't know that we always think about that piece, but I did want to call attention to it. And I am smiling here because I did not realize, I don't know why this boat is made of a dollar bill in my image here. So I apologize for that. It was clearly much smaller on my laptop when I looked at it. So we still have some time here. And so what I would like to do is I would like to, before we get into questions, I would just like to ask you to take a moment and think about, again, I am always one that it's great to hear things in theory, and it's a very different thing to try to put them into practice. And so I wanted to encourage you. I know that I have thrown a lot of tools and a lot of concepts and ideas at you in a very short amount of time here. But I wanted to encourage you all to just take a minute and to write down, whether it's on a piece of paper, on your computer, or even in the chat, if you were so inclined, to think about what one tool or takeaway, you know, stood out to you from the things we've just worked through. And how can you imagine applying that in the coming months in your league, whether it's at the local level, at the state level, or committee level in the organization. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat, and I will give you all a minute to do that brainstorming. Well, great. There are some great things in the chat here. I'm gonna share a few of them. I am assuming if folks put them for everyone that it's okay to talk about them. I like the word trust here has come up a couple of times, which I think is important about building trust. Someone has noted, there's been a couple about sort of the setting up measurable goals at the beginning, and then at the end, doing that follow-up and that feedback loop, which is important. Wish we could all embrace failure. That's a good point. Again, it's a learning opportunity, right? Let's see here. A couple of folks have commented on the DEI lens. Again, I will share that with you at the end, so you can take a look under each of those 5 questions. We've given a sample of some other questions that you might ask as you enter into that process. I like this too. Jones just put in here, having many opportunities for all people of all abilities. A couple of you have touched upon, and there's a recent post here from Mary that she'll reach out to new members to find out how they want to be engaged. And others have suggested here that it's important to remember the volunteer or the individual's experience in this process. Yeah, and a couple of you have commented too about collaboration, about the fact that this takes time, it takes patience, and that's another place where trust comes into play greatly. Deb, I know you're watching the chat too. Are there any things that are striking you here?
I'm having a hard time keeping up.
Well, and there's a comment in here too that it's a lot of information and reflection time is good. And I agree. And I think that's a good reminder to us too that, all leaders process things in different ways, that we, some of us need that time to think, some of us jump right in. And so also keeping in mind that work styles and leadership styles vary greatly among people. And so how we have that patience, and especially in this space when we're all working in new and different ways, to have that patience and grace with each other is so critically important. Okay, let me just look to see if there's any others that have come in here. Measurable goals is another piece that's come up here a couple of times as well. Great. Well, I have a couple more slides at the end, but I know we do have a few more minutes here, so I thought maybe this would be a good time to open this up to some questions, and then I can offer those resources at the very end and a couple of reflections of my own. But if anyone has any questions, welcome them in the chat, or I think folks have the ability to unmute themselves. I would welcome you to go ahead and do that. So the first question that's in the chat is what materials are available from LWV-US? So we do have a presentation that was done at the last council meeting, the National Council meeting, on the PTR, that Preferences, Traditions, and Requirements for Success. I have a link for that available on the last slide. We also have the DEI lens, as I've mentioned. We have it as sort of a one-pager, but then we also have an on-demand learning module if you would like to take that for yourself. And we have a webinar that we have done on this it's recorded and it's on our website as well. We also have just done a couple of webinars that are available sort of quote unquote on demand on our website about volunteer engagement that touch a little bit more on sort of that recruitment process and so forth. there are a lot of great resources on some of these other tools out on, sort of in the internet writ large, around the Tuckman model and around those 3 C's. But I can send a few of those on to folks if they're interested, but they're not league resources per se. Okay, I'm looking here to see if there are any other questions. Well, so here's a really important piece in the chat from Deb Wake. And Deb, I don't know if you want to talk about this more, but the State League has set up a mentor buddy system. So Deb, I don't know if you want to talk about that with the group more.
Actually, if Krista's available, she's the coordinator for that, and I would love for her to explain it if she's
Yes.
able.
Okay, so sure. Thank you, Deb. My name is Krista Jones. I'm the new member task force chair. And Deb created the task force as a way to find out how to meet the needs of our new members. So earlier this year, we launched a pilot mentor program. So I'm very thankful that several of you are involved in that, which is a more formal way to give our new members an outlet, an opportunity to share with more experienced members and to kind of find their way. So, but recently we have decided to launch a buddy program, which is a little bit more informal. And the goal is just to match up members, primarily new members with more experienced members, but we could be any members, just to find an opportunity for them to share and to check in. So Deb mentioned that she feels like her buddy / mentee just kind of wants to know she's there and can answer questions. So we're encouraging all of the leagues throughout the state to work on just kind of creating those informal buddy matches.
That sounds like a great program. I'm excited to hear how it goes as this program kind of develops and blossoms over the next year here. So could be a model for other states. So I look forward to hearing more. So, oh, and there's a request here, Krista, if you could put your email into the chat, that would be helpful for folks. There are a couple of questions that have come in here in the chat, and I think we have time to cover them quickly. So someone has asked to offer some thoughts about email. We talked about it as a way to provide communication. Is it an effective tool for collaboration? And I think that probably depends on individuals' work styles, right? I think some people can operate in that space very well, very easily. Others, maybe that's not the area of comfort. I also think sometimes we have to remember that we miss things in email. We miss tone. We miss the affect of someone's voice. I know we are not able to physically be together, but having the ability to do these Zoom calls where you can see people's faces, when you can see their reaction, we get so much out of that. And collaboration really is that place where you are trying to find definition and you are trying to find joint ownership. And so, I would consider at least some aspect of that being in some kind of voice to voice, if not virtual to virtual, right? Some kind of Zoom to Zoom or Teams to Teams space, if that's at all possible. And then maybe it goes from there into that email world. And I certainly think there's a lot of technology out there now, right, that we can avail ourselves of to do collaboration. Google Docs and other things where we are, building on each other's work. We're editing in real time together and in those spaces if you need written instructions and things like that. So again, I think it's probably finding a balance amongst these things. And it's also a good check-in point. I think once you've had that initial conversation, it's like, gosh, could we continue this by email? Or do you think that works for you? And I like that when we started this out, I used that term, the pop. And again, I apologize, there's so many letters in this, in this presentation, but you know, when you're planning your meetings, to have that purpose and outcome right at the top, and you may discover as you're planning for your meeting, gosh, do we really need to meet? Could we do this by email, right? Is this one of those times that we're just doing a check-in with each other or something, and maybe that could happen by email? Again, how are we using everybody's time effectively, efficiently, and in a way that works for other people? Someone else has written in here asking about comparing and contrasting leading and encouraging without micromanaging. And, you know, this is one too that probably, you know, we could spend a whole afternoon pulling apart. There are certainly loads and loads of websites and books and so forth about, you know, how to manage without micromanaging and so forth. But I do think some of this comes back to some of these tools that we have talked about today. So one is, you know, if we are really clear in our requirements for success, right, and we've let go of some of those preferences and traditions, you know, hopefully we are okay with letting people go out and find a way to do this themselves, the way that works for them, the way that they are comfortable with. And if we're not okay with letting go, that's fine too, but we need to articulate that at the beginning. You know, we need to put those guardrails up, right? We're gonna, you know, I need you to work within this lane, and just be really clear about that so that there's not missed expectations. I think another piece of this, of course, has to do with trust, and trust comes from building those relationships, from being part of the, you know, that collaboration team at the beginning, and of, you know, having that good communication as you move forward, so that you know, you can let go of some things. And I think the other theme that we have talked about here today is that you know, sometimes things don't go the way we think they're going to, and we need to be okay with that too. We need to say, like, well, we tried this and it didn't work. We're going to learn from it, and we're going to build upon it, you know, the next time. So. Okay. Yep, good communication is key. Folks are underscoring that. Yeah, and there's more here in the chat about email being a good and useful tool in many ways, but and I think the other thing that, you know, the face-to-face, and maybe this hasn't come across here, but is it does feed into the building relationships. We are all humans, right, in this work together. And especially now in this space that we're in, we are all juggling things that we never thought we would be contemplating. My grandmother is now 98, and she is in an assisted living facility in Massachusetts. And every time I talk to her on the phone, she says to me, I have never seen anything like what we're living through right now. And I think, well, goodness, if Nana hasn't seen it in 98 years, we are really in an extraordinary place. So I think, you know, the other benefit of having some of these initial meetings, voice to voice, face to face, we're getting to know each other as humans. You know, I think we're all intrigued a little bit to see where people live that we maybe didn't, you know, we get a glimpse into these things through Zoom and other things, but we can appreciate, you know, someone dealing with children at home, are they caregiving to another member of the family? Are they juggling you know, the work papers are piled up around their laptop when they're on Zoom? You know that they are feeling those stresses of many things at once. And so it helps to remind us of all of that as well, and the context in which we're doing our lead work as well as everything else. Okay. Are there any other questions or anything else you would like me to address? And if not, I will pull back up my last couple of resource slides for you. Okay. So we did our questions. So here are my parting thoughts, if you will. Just that that leadership comes in, as we've just been talking about, many sizes and in many forms. And it really is, as you read up more on leadership models, some people say, oh, are people born leaders? Do people grow to leaders? Everyone is a leader, right? And it's whether we, not whether, but how we develop, I think, some of these key muscles, right? These 4 action groups that we've talked about, inspiring and thinking and so forth, how we develop some of these tools to help us be even more effective leaders. And so, focusing on some of these key elements and even breaking them down into these little pieces, into these kind of practical tools that I hope can help to make your work easier as you go forward, because you are engaging more people, because you are approaching the work in new and different ways. And then just to say that resources and support are available. I will go ahead and move ahead here. These are some of those links. And again, we can, it sounds like these PowerPoints are going to be made available to all of you. And so you'll have these links. These are the ones that are on the League Management site, as I mentioned. But there are lots and lots more resources out there. And I'm happy to have anyone follow up with me if they have specific questions or thoughts that we would like to tackle at a later point.
Kelly, would you like to stick your email address into the chat?
Oh, sure. Sure. Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that is all I have for all of you. And so I am going to stick around. I'm going to be your next speaker's tech support. I'm going to be running the slides for her. So if you think of anything else, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. You can chat to me personally if you would like. So otherwise, again, thank you all very much for having me join you today. It's great to see all these faces. So. And thank you all for all that you are doing. I know my daughters and I last night, we were doing the last of our redistricting postcards. So it is quite a year. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Joan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. To continue our exploration of LEAD, we welcome Betsy Lawson, who will explain the formation of LEAD positions, the whys, the wherefores, the how-tos. Betsy currently serves as the Special Projects Coordinator at the League of Women Voters of the U.S., and for over 30 years, she was the senior lobbyist at LWV-US after working on Capitol Hill. Betsy attended Mount Holyoke College, Williams College, and the Catholic University School of Law. She is a member of both the D.C. and Massachusetts bars, and she lives in Virginia with her family and their incorrigible golden retriever by the name of Sassy, who lives up to her name. And Betsy is also a member of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area. So Betsy and your techie person, you're ready to take it away.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
You are, you're good to go.
Okay. This is my maiden voyage in Zoom presentations, so I hope you will all bear with me. When I spoke with Joan a few months ago, we talked about the fact that League program, particularly for new members and for folks outside the League, is sometimes a bit of a mystery. Other organizations use the term program in a different way, and so it sometimes takes a while for individuals within the League to get used to what League program signifies. And I know that a lot of you have probably participated in League program at the local, state, or LWV-US level. I'm going to basically go through the basics of program and program planning and League positions, as well as history. And so I'm going to allow plenty of time at the end for those of you who are experienced in program, who have thoughts and ideas to contribute, to in fact do so. League program can be very complicated, both in the process and positions, and it's something that league members are familiar with at the local level, state level, and LWV-US. It's, okay, this is my tech support here. It's something that has been around since the very beginning of the organization. The next slide, Kelly, we can do, and this is essentially a commercial announcement. Impact on issues, for those of you who are not familiar with it or are familiar with it, is the compilation of league positions that is put out by LWV-US following each convention, so every 2 years. It can be found on the league website. You can also order it from Amazon, where it's $5.95 for a paperback copy, $3.95 for Kindle, and I would note that it has a 5-star rating on Amazon. So if you don't have it, again, you can get it on, you can see it on the league website, but it's also good to have a copy. It really covers a lot of what I'm going to speak of today, in that it lists all the league positions and including the history on each position, the league principles, and information on taking action. So there really is, it's one-stop shopping when it comes to league program. The most recent copy, which is up on the screen, was actually a major update, which was done by some former national board members. And so there really have been a lot of changes made to it, just in terms of editing, getting rid of some of the history from 1992 or 1974, but also trying to make it much more user-friendly. As a result, this came out fairly late in the game. Am I right, Kelly? I think around 2019. Over the years, we tended to wait until the end of a congressional session in the convention year to do a new impact on issues. So I think I saw a question down there about when will the newest impact on issues be out. My guess would be in 2021. And I can't speak for LWV-US, but it would probably be in 2021. There has been such a major update this last time that I don't think it will take too much to update this version, although we will include the 2 new positions which were adopted at the last convention. So we can go to the next slide. League program, one of the reasons, and this is as much my opinion as anything official, but league program is a concerted program of study and action. And for most organizations, a program is something that a board will come up with, usually at the federal or national level, and share with the membership. The fact that the league program is concerted study is one of the reasons that I think makes things different for the league, in that, number one, it's a very rich and complicated process, but it involves all levels of league and league members. So from a lobbying perspective over the years, it was very helpful for me in meeting with members of Congress. I know we've got some Lobby Corps members on this in this workshop. I'm sure they found this too, that they knew on the Hill that our members were in their districts more than willing to contact them directly and were in line with what it was that the League lobbyists here in Washington were putting forward. The second thing that makes a difference in terms of League program is that there is this involvement, which a lot of groups can't speak to. There's, again, decision-making being done at the top rather than this very participatory process where a lot of League program has initiated at the grassroots level, gone through convention. This is not just obviously an LWV-US process. It's something that state and local leagues go through on a fairly regular basis. I know that the League of Women Voters of Virginia is currently conducting 2 studies. And so, you know, this to me, and if folks disagree, I'd be interested in hearing it at the end of this. But this is what makes us stand apart. And again, is a lot of work for a lot of people, but really produces results. And then when we have positions that are taken, the action can take place using those positions at the local and state level, as well as LWV-US. Tech support, next slide. League public policy positions fall into 4 categories. Representative government is really the bedrock of League positions. There's also a long history of having positions on international relations, natural resources, and social policy. There are 51 public policy positions, and that includes the 2 that were adopted at Convention 2020. Some positions, positions are drafted so as to stand the test of time. Given the work that goes into the study process, it's important that positions take the long term, be able to be used for the long term. Some of them stand for decades without any kind of update. One of the interesting positions to me always was the United Nations position, which was drafted and updated several times, but basically was a solid position that the League was able to take action on. And of course, with the United Nations, it's not merely that the League lobbies on it at in the US Congress, but also that we have the NGO representatives at the United Nations. And that was a good example of a position that stood the test of time, that was also able to be used because of the way that it was initially worded. And finally, around the year 2000, there was a general agreement that it was time to update the position. In part, one of the issues that I always remember was that the concept of peacekeeping forces was something that had not been in anyone's mind, had not been foreseen back when the position was originally taken. There were many other reasons to update the position, but that was one that we didn't need to update because it was being used so often. The history of League positions literally goes back 100 years as we celebrate the 100th anniversary. League of Women Voters, of course, was founded on the premise that now that women had the vote, they needed to be informed voters. And so the first program agenda list for the League consisted of 69 positions or 69 issues that the League was going to work on. In the very beginning, that included the Shepherd-Towner Act, which was child and maternal health care law, which, according to Wikipedia, was passed in part by Congress because of concerns that women now had the vote, and they were supporting this legislation, which did result in a reduction in maternal and child deaths. But the concern was that this was where women would put would vote on issues like this. And so it was in great part given credit to the organization for getting this law passed. It subsequently, in the late 20s, was not reauthorized because of objections on the part of the American Medical Association and several other organizations who felt that it was a, quote, socialist bill or law. So some things don't change. Another, in 1920-21, another thing that the League supported was the League of Nations, which obviously 20-some years later, 25 years later, grew into the League's support for the United Nations. And another bill which passed successfully and which was recently written up in the Washington Post was the Cable Act, which had nothing to do with cable as we know it, but that was the name of the sponsor. And it was a law that reversed an existing law whereby a woman, a citizen of the United States, a woman who married someone who was not a citizen of the United States, automatically lost her citizenship. And this law reversed that. And we have in the LWV-US office, pretty old nib pen that was one of those used by the president to sign the Cable Act into law. The League continued to work on a lot of different positions over the 20th century. You can almost see an ebb and flow in terms of interest or studies, or certainly what was happening in the country. In the 1930s, there was support for the Tennessee Valley Authority, lots and lots of activity in support of the creation of the United Nations, and trade took place in the 1940s. The Freedom Agenda, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, in the 1950s was a program that the League initiated across the country in response to the challenges to civil liberties and to the McCarthy era, so to speak. In the 1960s, there was a great deal of activity by the League on the issue of civil rights, housing, education, employment. There's an urban policy position that came from that era. There was a lot of activity on social policy issues, as well as environment and energy issues, which continued throughout the 1970s. The Equal Rights Amendment was a major effort for passage. The League worked very hard on the passage of the ERA throughout the 70s and to this day. And then post-Watergate, there were quite a few League positions and subsequent League action on selection of the president, the position on the president and Congress, and selection of the president, including electoral college. In the 1980s, the League, which had missed working on the original Voting Rights Act, put a great deal of time and energy into the reauthorization of the act, which took place in the 1980s. And there was a lot of work on budget and in particular tax reform. And then in the 1990s, motor voter and gun safety were two issues that LWV-US worked on. Motor voter in particular, the League was one of the central groups working for passage of the motor voter bill. In fact, another pen that was used to sign motor voter is located at the LWVU office. And then going into this century, there has just been a tremendous amount of work, as many of you know, on good government issues, campaign finance, certainly voting rights, healthcare, but throughout the years, the term, and I don't know if I ever put it up there on the slide, I don't know if I ever articulated it, but Maud Wood Park, the first president of the League of Women Voters, referred to those 69 issues as a kettle of eels. In terms of the multi-issues approach that the League took and continues to this day. Okay, Kelly. Okay, program planning is, I'm sure many of you know, and it takes place at all three levels of League, but is the process by which the League takes positions. And again, referring back to what I said earlier, I think is one of the really key reasons that League positions are so solid and are agreed to by members. League program materials are sent out to leagues in usually November, December, before a convention year. Local and state leagues hold program planning meetings in January through March. And the deadline for response forms, all of this is very much in keeping with the program bylaw, which sets out a lot of timing issues and requirements. But 3 months before convention, the response forms from leagues have to be back with the LWV-US. Program planning meetings, again, many of you have probably participated in them, but are an opportunity for those who have issues that they want to pursue to make the presentation to their local league, which in turn can make recommendations. Over the years, and as I think, I don't know if Joan referenced this in particular, but I pretty much have staffed program planning since the early 90s and continued as a consultant even to the 2018 convention and 2020. But program planning meetings, obviously, we've been able to take the process and streamline it along with a lot of other things over the years. So leagues participate in their meetings, get the information back to the national office. The league board makes a recommended program based on program planning responses. That's sent to all leagues, and then the convention votes on proposed program. So that's the process that is followed at the national level, and I think is very much reflected in a lot of state and local program planning, as are the program bylaws in lots of state leagues. So once convention takes action, and if the study is proposed, then there is a study process, which again can be reflected at all levels of league. And that's a new slide. Study process involves a study committee being appointed. Materials are drafted. Study questions are sent to leagues along with background materials. Leagues meet and come to consensus. Responses are sent to LWV-US. The league board crafts a position statement based on state and local responses, and the position is then announced. That's an area where there is a difference between local leagues in particular and also some state leagues. LWV-US announces the position after the board has put the position statement together. It doesn't require an additional vote per se, which is the case for many local leagues and some state leagues, which takes a position back to convention or to the annual meeting for a final vote. But if you look at impact on issues, you can see that many league positions over the years have been announced at different points in the year, not just in June of a convention year. And then all league positions, the LWV-US positions, are adopted at each convention. So even an issue that doesn't necessarily see a lot of action over a 2-year period is still kept up to date, so to speak, with league approval by that vote at convention, which is usually the last of the convention votes. Okay, reaching consensus or reaching agreement, consensus and concurrence. This is another area where I think that the league spends a great deal of time working to make sure that all members are involved in the process, which sets program apart from what other organizations might have. Studying consensus is, a traditional method where I think I went through that in the previous slide, where local leagues study an issue, arrive at a decision, and the decision is arrived at through consensus. When I was fairly new to the league, I was at a program Q&A at a convention, and one league member, who was very excited about the process and was trying to explain it to me, referred to consensus as the, quote, miracle of consensus. Maybe it's not a miracle, but it's a very interesting concept because it's not a vote. It's not a simple majority, and it's not necessarily unanimity. It's a decision where all participants are comfortable with the outcome. Everybody isn't happy with every position. As I think one description said, you win some, you lose some. But the group as a whole agrees to come together and agree on a particular outcome. And that's different. Concurrence is actually a different method of reaching consensus. It's more of a subsection of consensus. But concurrence is the process by which you determine if the group agrees with a proposed position statement. that in league tradition has been a different way of reaching consensus and I guess you'd say more streamlined way of doing so. It's been utilized over the years. I believe the update of the UN and trade positions used that, and there have been concurrences even more recently than that. But it's a in some ways easier process in that the language is determined at the LWV-US level by a study committee, which would be appointed in any event, however however they were going to reach agreement. They come up with a position, and leagues or individuals can basically agree up or down with that language. So concurrence is something that I think has been used increasingly over the years, and in particular, concurrence on the floor of convention. Concurrence on the floor of convention is a special situation in that, and that's provided in the bylaws, in which a proposed position is debated and voted on at league convention. I believe in the early 90s, there was a concurrence on the floor of convention, which came as a surprise to quite a few league members over the course of the next 2 years, because in those days, you simply had to bring a concurrence to the floor of convention and get a majority vote. So the bylaws were changed to say that in order, again, to go back to this member involvement, the importance of that, in order to go back to that, the notice had to be provided to all leagues, not just those who participate in and send a delegate to convention, but all leagues, so that they had notice. And a 2/3 vote is necessary now for passage of anything, any issue that's proposed as a concurrence on the floor of convention. Again, this is more anecdotal on my part, but I think that it's something that has been used more and more. But there is always a mix, if you look at the last 20 years or so, of positions that have study and consensus, others that have concurrence, and finally concurrence on the floor of convention. Kelly? Thank you. Advocacy at the national level. I suspect most of you are familiar with this, but it has again evolved over the years that in January, the LWV-US board establishes lobbying priorities based on existing league positions. And the goal is to maintain focus on issues of primary importance identified by LWV-US. The goals are to project a focused and consistent message, enhance the league's effectiveness, build the league's credibility, ensure that we have sufficient issue and political expertise, reflect program decisions made at convention or council, build on member interest, and enable the league to manage resources sufficiently. It's that's a long held practice, which has now been, put into words, but it's important, given the number of league positions, that when it comes to lobbying, that we can't lobby on every issue. So it's important to have criteria to see what issues are the most important for the league to work on. And action can take many forms. I think, Kelly, there's a new slide. Again, we've got some Lobby Corps alums and current members on the call. And if anybody's not familiar with Lobby Corps, I can tell you afterwards. You know, working on Capitol Hill, commenting on regulations with regulatory agencies, participating in all sorts of activities, rallies, working in coalition. You know, there's grassroots lobbying, which is really the meat and potatoes of league lobbying. Action alerts, getting leagues and league members to district meetings, participating in coalitions, and then litigating, which is something that the League of Women Voters has done for decades in particular, the state and LWV-US level. But in this year, is just, to me, again, a personal observation, phenomenal. The number of lawsuits that the league is participating in to make the voting process safe and secure and fair. I know that the League of Women Voters of Virginia, again, is one of those who has successfully worked to get things ready for and improved for November 2020. But it's just, I think everybody should be very proud of that. And finally, resources. Impact on issues. I think Kelly may have lost Kelly. Oh, here we go. Impact on issues is, again, the gold standard when it comes to learning about league and league positions. 100 years of the League of Women Voters is on the management site of LWV-US and does a broader description than the one I provided in terms of the work that the league has done over the years on different issues. League program planning, if you're not familiar with program planning, is the current information is up on the league management site right now. I don't think it will be up there forever, but I put that out there. And then League of Women Voters study guidelines. The league management site has a lot of resources, and you can check the search engine there, which is different, I believe, than the search engine for lwv.org, and find lots of good information on league program, and I would recommend it. And I'm going to close now and take questions. And I'm going to say that all this work, and again, it's a lot of work as compared to organizations where the board meets 3 or 4 times a year and says, let's do this. It pays off. And I will quote a former majority leader of the Senate, not the current occupant of that space, but who received an award from the league, and at the award ceremony said it meant a great deal to him to get this award from the League of Women Voters, the organization that won't take yes for an answer. And I think that sums things up pretty nicely. So again, recognizing that I'm new to this, if folks have contributions or questions, have at it.
Betsy, if you'll permit, I've been watching the chat.
Okay.
And I have a question for you that is about local league priorities. When you get to the action part, do you suggest reflecting and responding to relevant community issues, or being proactive and raise issues by our statements that are not being emphasized in the community?
Okay, I think I'm going to need a little more information on the question. So the question is whether leagues should react to what's going on in the community versus proactively push for passage of league priorities or league
I
position.
I believe that that is the basis of the question. And if I got it wrong, if you would put it again in the chat.
Okay, I think the answer is both. And again, it's really up to the local league to make that determination. You know, resources is always an important question in terms of what you do and what you can do. You know, I think it depends. I mean, in a quiet year, if there is such a thing in any locality, it's good to push for something that the league wants to have done. On the other hand, if lots of challenges come up to something that's a well-established league position, then the league is going to want to respond. So it tends to be a combination of the two. Unfortunately, it's great to have some very positive issues that you would like to work on, but if in the legislative body at whatever level there's absolutely no chance of it getting through, then you've got to make the determination. I think one of the, again, this is a very, an organization where words mean a great deal, but I think in the second situation of promoting an issue that doesn't have a lot of community or council, say, support, then you're talking about a campaign. It's got to be a major campaign to get other groups, other people, politicians involved.
And to follow up on that, because at the local level, many of these issues are ongoing or they perhaps come up irregularly, how do you react quickly? Since it's a 2-year study process, how do you pivot quickly when something comes up? How do you address that?
Well, that's been a quandary for a long time. If as I understand it, if the study is ongoing, then it's very difficult to, without a position to actually respond, although leagues over the years, and again, these are decisions made by local leagues. It's not something that we can give advice, but it's really up to the local league. But if it's something ongoing and there is a study taking place, then obviously public meetings on the issue, getting information out, inviting the public to, I know that leagues have done that over the years with LWV-US studies, inviting, having debates, inviting people to come and talk about the issue. But again, because of the structured setup of league positions, we have found ourselves in a position, the one that historically I know people still talk about is the Voting Rights Act. But it was true with the healthcare position at the national level, where we were literally studying healthcare as the Clintons were putting together the healthcare bill. And I actually walked the new league healthcare position, the first part of it, down Connecticut Avenue and 17th Street to the White House to present it, because our position was reached about 2 days before the deadline for hearing from organizations. So we made it on that one.
That's incredible. If you're using a concurrence, are the votes tallied?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes. And you know, I do know when there was a concurrence again, I think it might have been the UN and trade back in 2000, but there was one concurrence where leagues could respond as a league, or they could send us responses from all their members. And that got way too complicated, way too quickly.
Would you please explain briefly the difference again between a concurrence and a consensus?
Yeah, consensus, again, you know, concurrence is a means of reaching consensus. So it's, in some ways, it's almost like study and consensus and study and concurrence. In the materials go out, the information, there's a study committee appointed, you know, I mean, again, you all know that, and there's some great studies going on right now. I mean, so consensus is basically leagues meeting as a group and hashing out responses to the questions that are usually presented as part of the study, whereas concurrence is the position itself being drafted and sent to leagues, or it can be league members as individuals, and having basically a yes or no vote.
Thank you. How are the priorities set at Lobby Corps? And we could have, if there's time at the end, Julia could perhaps address it for the state level.
So the question is, how are league priorities determined in general, or in terms of how are decisions made as to what issues Lobby Corps lobbies on?
The question is, how are priorities set for action / lobbying? So it's not specific, but we may use a different method at state level. So,
well, I mean, the process for priorities is the one that I outlined, and I think it's described in Impact on Issues. It's certainly on the website, but it's the, you know, looking at lots of things. You know, is this an area where the league has expertise? Is this something that Congress is dealing with? That's not all encompassing, but that's got to be a pretty important part of it. You know, is it something the league is known for? I mean, good government issues, voting issues are the bedrock of the league. The league is known for that, and respected for that. So, you know, are there coalitions that we work with where maybe somebody else has expertise and we can participate but not necessarily take the lead? There are a number of criteria that are used, and amazingly, it usually presents itself that there are some very logical issues. You would know this as well, Deb. In terms of Lobby Corps assignments, again, it seems like, you know, what is timely is the most important question, and that's been. It may have changed. Again, I have not been doing this for several years, but that's really been the main criteria of what is out there. And again, it's the mix. Arguably, it could be something where we're bringing a new issue to Capitol Hill, or it could be something where, you know, the Congress is in the heat of debate and the league wants to weigh in.
and to sort of piggyback on that, is study always the basis of these positions? Is there ever a time or a way that these are arrived at without an underlying study?
No. I mean, maybe that's too bald. Kelly, you've been around for a long time. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but no, it has been painful in some instances. But again, if we're going to maintain this whole idea of we are speaking for our membership, we really are, then there are instances where in fact the league cannot take action. And oftentimes when that happens, at the following convention, you'll see somebody, a league, present that issue. I think that again, this is very historical, but I think that healthcare was very difficult for a lot of leagues leading up to the healthcare study in the 90s. There was actually one passed by convention in the late 70s, early 80s. This is, I mean, anecdotal evidence on my part, that was premised on funding, and they didn't get the funding. And by the time we took that healthcare position, it was something that leagues were really, really eager to do.
I'd like to just, Elizabeth Franks. We haven't talked in a long time, Betsy.
Hi, Elizabeth.
But one in the, I want to say in the 40s, but when I moved to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois in the 60s, they told me that the National League had adopted a position on housing discrimination based on a position that the League of Women Voters of Illinois had adopted on it. They voted on it at convention.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an exception to all of this.
Okay. Well, and concurrences, of course, are often based on, I mean, you bring up a good point, on league positions. I mean, I'm really glad you said that, Elizabeth, because I had left that out. A concurrence guarantees that at least some level of league has studied the issue. So that's, I mean, gun safety would be a good example. There was a local league in Illinois, again, that had studied the issue. The Illinois League adopted by concurrence that position and then brought it to the LWV-US convention where it was adopted. But concurrent statements, that's a very important thing, are based on existing league positions so that at some level of league, it was studied.
Thank you. And speaking of studies, how elastic are they? For instance, there's no mention of government lotteries or gambling. So would the fiscal policy positions stretch that far?
Well, all these questions of these types can be posed to the LWV-US. It has to be from a league, although obviously they'll respond to individuals, but that's a good example to work from. As to how elastic, I like the word elastic, as to whether or not a position covers a particular issue. And there are different criteria that are used to determine it. There's a federal request form on the LWV website. Again, I think it's mentioned in impact on issues, but the answer would be, it really depends. The example given, there is no LWV-US position that would cover gambling and lotteries. And the reason that I'm comfortable saying that is that there are state positions that deal with that issue. And that's one of the things the advocacy litigation department would first look at is, in the absence of an LWV-US position, are there state leagues that have determined that there is none and therefore have taken their own positions? And that would be a good example of yes. And again, as things have progressed over the years, sometimes if a state league wanted to work on that issue, they could propose concurrence with another state league's position. So concurrence is something that can be done state to state as well as state to LWV-US.
What is the accountability for the statements that are made in our action statement positions? Should we probably evaluate these each year?
Okay.
I don't know if that's setting priorities, perhaps.
I'm not, I guess I would need to know what's meant by statements.
If the questioner means priorities, I think that you probably do need to examine those because priorities do shift. Has the league changed its definition of nonpartisan?
Wow, no. Has what people consider partisan changed? That's another question, but no, the league has not. And remember, again, I'm not officially, I am a mere consultant at this point. So Kelly will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But no, the league has been very consistent. And of course, this is something that affects tax status and everything else. So no, the league has stayed nonpartisan. And in fact, one of the Amazon reviews of impact on issues has a gentleman who speaks eloquently to how the league is able to maintain its nonpartisan status while being proactive on positions.
Thank you. The question of a league being able, wait, sorry, this moved on me. Can you address how national positions can be used at local and state levels?
Sure. I think that there are some, obviously there are some positions that lend themselves more naturally. The challenge has always been for leagues who want to work on international relations issues. It gets sort of tough in terms of making that a local or a state priority, but social policy and natural resources and certainly representative government all lend themselves to being adapted at the local level. The equal access to housing position is one that a lot of leagues have used. There's positions, you know, voting rights. I'm just healthcare. I mean, leagues are able to take, you know, the LWV-US can give you this sort of overarching question, like the one earlier about gambling, as to whether or not the language in the position would cover a particular, say, local ordinance or that type of thing. And then it's up to the board of the local league or the state league, because they have the information on what is actually included in that. You know, they're the experts there to see if, given the interpretation of the position itself by LWV-US, does this particular ordinance or law bill at the state level actually fit. But a lot of leagues have used LWV-US positions. In fact, I think that there may be a trend in the last 10 years or so, if you look at some of the league positions that have been adopted, there is a trend to have positions, abolition of the death penalty would be the one that I would cite, where that's really not a federal issue for the most part. The whole question of the death penalty comes up much more at the state level, almost exclusively until at least this year. And so I think that some positions that have been adopted are ones that make it possible for state leagues to take action without having to undergo a state study, even though this is, again, by virtue of reality, something that happens more at the state level. The death penalty position was interesting in that it first came to convention for concurrence, say around 2006, and it didn't pass because 7 state leagues at the time were undertaking their own studies on the death penalty and didn't want to abandon those in the middle of everything. 2 years later, the concurrence passed with flying colors and the support of all the leagues that had their own individual positions.
Betsy, thank you so much. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to pick your brain, and it can be a challenging and a little bit confusing. So really appreciate your helping us to understand a little bit more about positions and how it works. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So everyone, just want to let you know that we will be making the recording of this available, and we've reached out to all of our speakers for their slide decks, and we will make those available too when we have them all. Joan will be sending out an evaluation to you later. Please respond to that. We used some of the feedback from last year's workshop in preparing for this one, and we're always open to hear what you would like to know more about, and happy to facilitate that. So a couple things to mark your calendars. October 8th, the Virginia League will be participating with the North Carolina League and the Georgia League, and our national president will be the moderator for a redistricting forum entitled Racism and Redistricting: How Unfair Maps Impact Communities of Color. That will be streamed on Facebook Live October 8th from 7 to 8:30. So please save that date. We'll have more information as it's available. And we do have an event posted on our Facebook page, so you can look for it there. And we'll have more information coming up. Also on December 10th, we will be celebrating our state league's 100th anniversary. And as you may know, our state's anniversary is actually November 10th, but that is so quick on the heels of the election that we thought we're just going to take a little breather and celebrate in December instead. And actually, also speaking of December, the first Wednesday in December will be our annual pre-session. And at our board meeting yesterday, we did decide we should do that virtually this year. We just don't know yet that there will be a vaccine or a way to meet in person. So we will be sending out more information about that as well. And as I said, December 10th, we will be celebrating our 100th anniversary. So I had put in the chat, we do put a lot of this information in our newsletters. If you don't receive those, please let us know. We're all very available, so send us an email if there's something that you want to know or would like to see. So I think that's everything. Joan, did I miss anything?
No, as usual, you did not.
To ask Betsy if I'd like to get Betsy's contact information.
Betsy, would you mind putting that in the chat for us?
I can't see, I'm apparently not able to use that.
I will do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. And we can share out when we share out the recording and everything, we can make those contact emails available as well. So thank you all so very much. Appreciate it, your attendance, and go out and vote.
Did you see that? She's B. Lawson at LWV.org.
Yes,
Elizabeth? Good.